I'm delighted to be reading from my second full-length book that Diane has already mentioned, that Water Lessons, that came out in April of this year. And I'm also delighted to be reading with Joanna Novak. Just to give people a little background on the book, there are a lot of poems in here about my mother's alcoholism and eventual death, about my father's dementia, and then also about my own childlessness. And then against the background of these personal griefs, I explore the patriarchal underpinnings of the world I grew up in, and also the my complicity in systemic racism as a white girl growing up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So that's kind of a broad overview. I am going to start with the first poem in the book, and I'll end with the last poem in the book, and I'll read a bunch in between. The first poem in the book is very appropriately called Welcome. I wrote this poem back in 2017 when I was in Washington, D.C. for the AWP conference, which for any of you who don't know, that's a giant writing conference that gets something like 10, 12,000 people. It goes, lasts for several days. And I love the conference, but I get pretty overwhelmed with the conference at the same time. And so my approach is to go to as many sessions as I can during the day, and then go back to my hotel room and watch TV just to sort of chill out. And the hotel where I was staying had one of those welcome channels, which I had never really encountered before. But every time I landed on this welcome channel, someone would be telling me about the amenities of the hotel. And I started getting a little freaked out by this woman on the welcome channel. I started writing down everything she was saying. And during one phone call with my wife in the evening, I said, I'm starting to get kind of freaked out by this woman on the welcome channel. And then on the basically on the airplane coming back to Nashville, I wrote this poem, or a draft of this poem, and I showed it to my wife when I got back to Nashville, and she said, "Oh my God, I had no idea you were that freaked out by the welcome channel." Flipping the remote, I keep landing on the hotel's welcome channel. "Hello," a woman says. "White woman, pretty smile. May I have a minute of your time?" "Be as alert as you are at home," she says. Pretty woman, concerned for my safety. She keeps walking towards me, there behind everything else, like fear behind the eyes. I keep flipping, taking in the news of the week. People are protesting in the streets. This pussy fights back, no ban, no wall. Never invite strangers into your room. Pretty smile, pretty woman, as pretty as my mother was when she was alive, pretty as she was in my dream. Be alert, the woman says, as alert as you are at home. I never knew on Tuesdays what she'd look like. My mother, who drove to the Del Mar College of Hair Design to get dolled up cheap by a stranger, sometimes large loopy curls, other times tight and small, tucked in like something sleeping. Use the viewport, the woman says, if someone knocks on your door. Hepburn chestnut 1 week to a sassy blonde the next. In the dream, she is reading from my book. She looks happy. Keep the doors and windows locked, the woman says. In 5 pages, my mother will be dead. First, the bottles hidden in bookcases throughout the house, then the heart wing. Locked, the woman says, at all times. My mother glances up. She is reading in the voice she used for Sounder and the Chronicles of Narnia. She reads as if the woman she is will not die, as if the woman who dies will not be her, as if she is not even there. Like when she learned about my attempts, aspirin, then the knife, my hand like Abraham's over Isaac. Nice story, my mother said. We had learned to slip out of ourselves, to squeeze our consciousness through a hole the size of a dime. We were small inside our bodies. My body is sin, she told me once. Be alert, the woman says, as alert as you are at home. Nice story, she said. So, thank you. So this next poem is called Ars Poetica, which for anyone who doesn't know, it just means the art of poetry. And it's often a poem that kind of explains someone's impulses, the poet's impulses for writing. Ars Poetica. My mother is saying something I still can't hear, and I want to believe there is a door. Sometimes I dream I am being led through darkness, and I wouldn't call her death natural. So many rooms were closed off before we knew they were there, and I was the one no one believed. And my father still insists her liver was fine. It was her heart, he says, just her heart. And then this next one is called Grief. There will be days when the word mother will burst out of you like the black smoke of a squid, a fire deep inside water. Anyone can become animal or a flicker of light. Remember, infinity means unfinished, and time doesn't move at the same speed for everyone. Remember, mother contains not just the sea, but the darkness of the sea, and there is no such thing as a half-life for grief. Even oceans contain waterfalls, and your mother is inside everything that you write, sometimes as melody, sometimes as mountain or bone. Every time you hear the word, you become something else. I have a bit of an obsession with my mother. My mother died 20 years ago, and I write a lot about her. And even though they're kind of, you might say, about depressing topics, I feel such a connection when I write these poems. I feel her presence in a lot of ways. So they bring me a lot of comfort. This one is called My Mother is a Peaceful Ghost. In my dreams, my mother keeps walking out of the kitchen singing, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." She never sings past the first verse. Last night, I dreamed I was back at the house, every light on when I arrived. My mother, forgetting she was dead, smiled, said she was fine, everything was fine. At family gatherings, weddings, baptisms, my mother would look around sort of stunned and say, "There's so many of you," as if we'd arrived from someplace other than her own body, a country foreign to her. My mother is no longer flesh or breath. She's not a thing anymore. Is she with God? Some days I believe, some days I don't. Centuries ago in a church in Europe, someone carved "God help us" into a pew. Plague years. Sometimes my God is so big, I wonder what's the use? Divinity diluted into nothingness. My mother tried to stop drinking. I stopped, she told me once, like you'd stop a dryer or a washing machine. We were standing in the Blackwater Falls gift shop looking at coffee mugs printed with maps. West Virginia on one side, waterfalls on the other. One mug had a gold star to mark the visitor center. "You are here," it said on a travel mug. Here and not here. How do you name what isn't here? She tried to stop and didn't. So the inspiration for this next poem was a news story I heard on NPR about racism and white supremacy. It was actually an interview with a Black scholar talking about racism and white supremacy. And at one point, he sort of parenthetically mentioned how racist the Pippi Longstocking books were. And these were books that I grew up reading as a kid in the 70s. Pippi Longstocking was my hero, you know, I loved her character in the books. But I also knew that as a white person trying to understand what was going on and what has been going on all along in our country, that I needed to listen to what this person was saying. So I was out doing errands in Nashville, and as soon as I got home, I found an old copy of one of my Pippi Longstocking books, and I reread it, and I was pretty horrified by what I read. So that's kind of the background of this poem. It's called Primer. You're a white girl, cute in the eyes, reading your first chapter book. Maybe it's summer and you're sitting on the porch steps, painted red every year by your mother. Maybe the sky is blue and the elm trees don't have Dutch elm disease, which means you haven't grieved yet for a tree. Maybe this is the day your father will set up the swimming pool with its thick plastic floor and round corrugated wall. Maybe soon you'll feel the pieces of dark mulch poking up from beneath the plastic. Maybe you loved the bumpiness of the pool floor because you knew how to float above it. It wasn't a big pool, but you were small. Your body fit everywhere, under porches when you played 12 o'clock, the witch comes out, or inside the house, cupboards, sideboards. Maybe this is the day you're reading Pippi Longstocking, the year you loved Pippi best. Her house by the sea, her horse, her strength, the ease with which she traveled the world. Maybe you're already thinking about Halloween, painting your face with freckles, putting hangers in your hair to make your braids stick out. Maybe you didn't think anything about the barbarians in the Congo, didn't understand the part about Pippi's father being king of the Negroes. Maybe you saw the picture of Pippi with her face painted black and turned the page the way you turned any page. White girl inside the white imagination, the horse, the tiny house, the beautiful ocean, before you knew an ocean could be anything but beautiful. And then this next poem is called Daughter Poem. My wife and I experienced a failed adoption about 15 years ago. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are several poems in here about childlessness. Sometimes I see her pressing her palms against a window pane in a house that is real, the way a house in a dream is real, until you start to describe it. And all you can say is, it was this house, only it wasn't. It's winter and she likes to feel the cold entering her body, or it's summer and it's heat she's after. She wasn't born, so she can't die. Sometimes there is a window, but no girl, and I am the one walking towards it. Sometimes I see her peering in, forehead against the screen of our back door, or running ahead of me on a path that is real, the way a path in a dream is real, saying, this way, this way. So I have 3 more poems to read. This one is just a short one. It is called The Last Time. And it's back to my mother. The last time I saw my mother, she was sitting in the front passenger seat of my father's car. I looked down into her face through the open window. She looked up at me and smiled, said hello, her right hand resting on the door. She looked older than her age, but beautiful and luminous, something in her already beginning to change, a seed buried in the ground, sensing the sun's fuller light. She smiled, said hello, or maybe I was the seed, she the light. I'm here, she said, and here was someplace else. So this poem is a little bit longer. It's called The Life I Live, and there's a lot going on in this poem. There's a lot of different stories kind of woven together. So I just want to mention that at one point I make a reference to Joanna Macy, who is a Buddhist practitioner and Buddhist scholar, and also an environmental activist. And then I also make a reference to George, the Hawaiian tree snail, who died New Year's Day 2019, and he was the last known member of his species. And so I just mentioned those 2 references in case that helps as I'm reading through all these different stories. The Life I Live. I could feel them looking up at me, imaginary customers in a lightly furnished room. As I scribbled orders on a small pad of paper, I was 9, bringing make-believe food to people in a hurry or on vacation. One I remember was grieving, another I could tell was in love. Sometimes I imagine myself at 90, somewhere north, forever cold, cradling a doll, my mind as demented as my father's is now, the doll's eyes opening and closing, making a soft clicking sound like an upturned beetle trying to right itself. My daughter, neither born nor conceived, splits my life in two directions. I like my life, who I've become and who I love. Still, my mind bears a creek deep enough for swimming, children's shoes piling up by the back door. My sorrow is as real as I am. Sometimes I barely feel it, the way an animal hibernating in winter might be cut and barely bleed. Other times, the daughter I never had cups her hands around fireflies, a glass jar on the grass beside her, and asks, "Why doesn't night stay in the jar?" Joanna Macy said we must face our despair, look right at it, which is why I looked at George, Hawaiian tree snail, last of his kind, dead the first of the year. His death symbolic as it was real. When you give something a name, people pay attention, and everyone said he must have been lonely. Here's something I can't name, the peace I felt while looking at his photo, as if looking was a kind of love, not enough, but more than nothing at all. My daughter is a lovely fiction, and God, what shall I do with God? A priest held hostage for 3 years celebrated communion every day with his fellow prisoners. Body of Christ broken for you as he distributed the invisible bread. Blood of Christ shed for you, pretending to lift a chalice of wine. Everyone said what happened was real. My sorrow twists dolls out of willow, buries them in the shade of an old oak tree. My daughter presses her hands over my eyes. Now you see me, now you don't. The doll's eyes open and close. I'm happier than this poem says I am, and also sadder. Maybe this will be enough at 90, walking through snow, holding what isn't there until what isn't there calls my name. And then I'm going to end with it's the very last poem in the book, and it is called I Love. It's a little happier. I love how my wife says operators are standing by whenever I'm out of town and she wants to chat. I love that birds can see stars and that even fruit flies need sleep. I love that an African gray parrot learned how to use 100 words and that his last words were, "Be good," and "I love you." I love how Jesus stopped a crowd of men from stoning a woman just by writing in the sand. I love that an octopus has 3 hearts. I love that Mother Teresa only heard from God one time and it was enough. I love that some birds mate for life and that after one dies, the survivor sings both parts of their song. I love that our brains are mostly water. I love that some people believe in heaven and some don't. I love that an owl visited my wife in a dream and that my wife said hello and asked, "Are you the kind of owl that people refer to as a barred owl?" I love that what saves one person is not the same as what saves someone else. I love how the word cranium sounds like the name of a flower. I love that my mother keeps wanting to show me her garden. I love that the owl answered back. So thank you all. Thank you so much.